Today we're going to show you the top 5 dark things the Vikings did, so be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Number 1. Magic mushrooms. The theory is that the mushrooms which grew in the area where the Vikings lived caused them to have hallucinations. It also increased their adrenaline levels, causing the berserker state. As advantageous as it may have been for the Vikings, slaughtering people while high on mushrooms couldn't be nearly as fun as watching The Wizard of Oz while listening to Pink Floyd. Number 2. Viking soup. Since bloody and violent skirmishes were part of the Viking life, Viking women became pretty knowledgeable about battle wounds. Specifically, Viking women had a way to gauge how bad a stab or slash wound was. They would feed an injured warrior a broth that leeks and herbs. After eating it, the woman would smell the wound. If they knew that the wound was too deep and there was no way to fix it, with death coming soon, the woman would do nothing to help the dying warrior. They would focus their time and use their remedies only on warriors that could help. Number 3. Swords. Viking swords. The Vikings used a number of different weapons like long axes and spears. Even their shields were used as offensive weapons. However, their most prized weapon was the long swords. The Vikings would name their swords after names like the Widowmaker and Corpse Bramble, and the swords would be passed down generation to generation. As Viking boys grew up, their fathers would talk about the men who died by the sword. This helped pass along their family's history and instill the idea of the swords were double-edged and sharp enough to cut through or cut a limb with one slice. The men carried their swords at all times, usually on their back, and slept beside them. They needed to be armed at all times because of the family disputes. Factions of Vikings were constantly at war, after all. Men were expected to be able to defend their homes, their families, and help defend their leaders and property. Number 4. Holmgang. The Viking justice system is rather different than the laws of today. Notably, insulting someone of a higher class was off limits, but killing someone wasn't always illegal. For example, if someone was murdered, then their family could kill the murderer. Of course, this led to long-lasting back and forth blood feuds. Another way of settling disputes a holmgang wasn't a band of ruffians who were big fans of actor Ian Holm. They were fights, sometimes to the death. It essentially a duel with one person challenging another he felt had wronged him. It was also to be held within the week of the challenge, and someone could volunteer to fight in place of the person who was challenged. At the beginning of the duel, the challenger would read the rules, which varied from region to region. Rules included things like what weapons were to be used, how many shields could be used, who could take the first strike, what would signify the winner, and what the compensation would be for the victor. Of course, sometimes the only way the holmgang would come to an end was if the person who challenged didn't show up for the duel. They were automatically deemed guilty. If the charge was bad enough, then anyone from any social class would be able to kill that person. This meant that if the leader of his clan didn't show up for the deal, a slave could kill him without any legal repercussions. Number 5. Games. The Vikings love violence, so it should be a surprise that their games make UFC look like the ballet. In Viking games, death and serious injuries were common. The rule was that men could stop playing whenever they wanted. If they got killed, it was their own fault. One game they played was a swimming competition, and we use that term very loosely. The point of the game was for the men to hold an open water underwater tournament for as long as he could, or hold an opponent underwater for as long as he could. If the man couldn't reach the surface, he drowned. Another game involved 2 teams and a ball, and it essentially was a game of full contact keep away. The game was rather violent and was only played once a year in the autumn. Wrestling was another major aspect of Viking culture. It helped them stay fit and in fighting shape, even when they weren't raiding villages. And if the games themselves weren't dangerous enough, fights and brawls could erupt at any time. On one account, there was a game that was being played by a group of boys. A 6-year-old boy drove an axe into the head of another boy because he was roughed up by the boy earlier in the game. If the fights didn't end on the field, they could lead to blood feuds that could last for years. For some perspectives on how violent the games were, one warrior could still fight in battle, but the games were too intense and he could only watch. And that's all for today. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments which one of these were your favorite.